Discover the incredible transformations. How 100 brave souls built shelters to survive medieval America in a small town that had long forgotten its own stories. 35-year-old Jessica Parker stumbled across a truth that seemed ripped from the pages of her father's history books. A hidden estate, once a refuge in a chaotic past, whispered promises of legacy and resilience. But for Jessica, that whisper was overshadowed by the roaring demands of her present 2 children, bills piling up, an uncertain future looming like the storm gathering on the horizon. Jessica wiped down a table in the diner where she worked, the familiar smell of greasy burgers mingling with burnt coffee. The tips were modest, barely keeping the lights on in their cramped apartment, but she smiled for the sake of Emily and Ryan, who colored stories of castles and knights in their little heads. She glanced at the clock. Her shift would end soon, but the grocery store awaited, another battle in her day. The weight of it all bore down on her, pressing her heart into a tight cage of anxiety. She felt lost, caught between her barely there paycheck and her father's newfound claims of heritage. What if it's just another pipe dream? She muttered into her apron. All thoughts of grandeur evaporated when she thought of the dilapidated estate that demanded resources she didn't have. Was it truly a legacy worth fighting for? A legacy that could drag her even deeper into financial chaos? A knot formed in her stomach as she wrestled with the fear of letting down her kids, yet a stubborn flicker of hope ignited beneath her doubt. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. She nibbled on the edges of a daydream that painted her as a savior, gathering a group to revive the estate, to breathe life back into the walls crumbling under time's weight. It was insanity, she realized, but insanity mingled with determination, 2 sides of the same coin. Who would stand by her? A retired firefighter who wore his old scars like a badge, a factory worker hunting for a semblance of pride, a young artist seeking validation from a family that had cast him aside? Could she really pull together a patchwork of broken souls to breathe spirit into that estate? The phone rang, the sound slicing through her thoughts like thunder. She barely blinked as she picked it up, heart racing wildly. A call from the city office that could mean grave trouble, or a glimmer of hope. But would their collective worth be enough against the face of corporate greed, to shield their fragile aspirations from being bulldozed away? The fear clenched her throat. She realized this was no ordinary call. It had the potential to change everything. The storm was closing in, driven by more than just the weather. Fear coiled around her mind as she grasped the splintered dreams lining her heart. The clock was ticking, and with it, the fate of her hope, legacy, and the people who dared to believe in her vision. Wresting her breath from the stranglehold of doubt, she felt the weight of all she stood to lose, but deep within, the embers of a fight flickered. The meeting was in 2 days. Time was slipping through her fingers, and the storm wasn't just outside, it was brewing in her soul. Would she do it? Would she protect the dreams they had painstakingly built, or let it slip into obscurity? Jessica stood behind the counter, her fingers tracing the rough edge of the worn wood, her thoughts a tangled mess of promises and fears. The phone call had left her reeling, saturated with uncertainty. As she wiped down the last table, a chilling realization washed over her. The meeting in 2 days wasn't just a meeting. It was her opportunity to forge a new path, not just for herself but for those who might join her in reclaiming that estate. The prospect of rallying support simmered in her mind, provocative and unsettling. What did she even know about leading others? In the back of her mind, her self-doubt whispered insidiously. They'll see you for who you really are, lost and scared. They won't follow you. A hot rush of frustration flared up, forcing her to tilt her head back, pushing the air from her lungs as if trying to dislodge those thoughts. As she closed the diner and stepped into the evening chill, she felt the weight of the approaching storm in the air, a tangible metaphor for the turmoil stirring within her psyche. She glanced at the estate perched on the edge of her thoughts, and in that moment, it transformed from a dilapidated structure to a beacon of hope, a testament to resilience and possibility. Could she fight for that vision? She took a shaky breath, recalling her father's passion for history, the stories he once told her about building resilience against all odds. That era was filled with countless struggles, but those who persevered emerged not only victorious but transformed. Jez's personal well-being hummed through her, reigniting her determination as her feet carried her instinctively toward the estate. As she walked, Jessica made a conscious effort to shift her focus. The worries of bills, grocery lists, and her unsteady paycheck faded with each step, replaced by questions of strategy. Who would she need to reach out to first? Was there still time to rally those potential allies she had envisioned earlier? The memory of Marcus, the retired firefighter, came to mind. He had always had a soft corner for community-based projects. She could approach him first, knowing he possessed the grit and experience of a team player. Perhaps then, she could channel that into convincing Michael, the factory worker. Both men were carrying their burdens, but who was to say their combined struggles couldn't forge a new beginning? Ideas cascaded through Jessica's mind in a furious stream. What if they all had roles to play? Their diverse backgrounds could morph into strengths: Marcus's leadership, Michael's technical skills, and she could break the ice and gather opinions, bringing them together in a united front. As her thoughts raced onward, she found herself outside the estate, its forgotten grandeur towering silently against the encroaching storm clouds. She could sense the life that still clung to its walls, the laughter of children who once played in what could be a shelter for many. In her heart, that spark of hope blazed fiercely, challenging her fears and doubts. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows at the estate's entrance, a stray wild dog, scraggly but with fierce eyes filled with life. The creature looked at her, and in its gaze, she felt an immediate connection. Loneliness echoed through their mutual plight. Her heart pounded as the realization sank in. Like that dog, she was fighting for survival, a chance to thrive against all odds. The storm was brewing inside Jessica and out. She was more than a mother or a waitress, she was a force about to awaken. Yet a question loomed larger than any she had processed thus far. Would she have the courage when faced with the cold, hard reality of opposition? With determination igniting within her, she turned away from the estate, ready to shape her plan and face her fears. But as she walked back toward the lights of her life, Emily and Ryan, she knew that confrontation awaited her. The real test was coming, and she was not yet sure if she was ready. What would happen when the storm finally broke? Would she be ready to face not only the corporate giant but also the doubts lurking within her? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patches across the floor. Jessica brewed her coffee, savoring the moment of normalcy before the storm that loomed ahead. She clutched her mug tightly, feeling the rush of heat seep into her palms as she watched steam swirl into the air, a momentary distraction from the urgency that nagged at her core. The meeting was rapidly approaching, and with each tick of the clock, her resolve began to solidify. She grabbed a notepad, the empty pages a daunting invitation for her thoughts to take form. Jessica jotted down names, ideas, and strategies, trying to quell the swirl of anxiety that clawed at the edges of her determination. Marcus was first on her list. His reputation as a problem solver made him an invaluable ally. The thought of knocking on his door unleashed an unexpected wave of adrenaline. But what if he turned her away? Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, each thud a reminder of the doubts she needed to silence. Next, she turned her focus to Michael. His technical skills could streamline any logistics she might encounter. He had that knack for figuring things out, a trait she admired. Yet, would he be receptive to her vision? The community had been quiet for too long, and everything was at stake, not just the estate, but a part of her future. With each mention of a name, memories flickered back, laughter around the table, the warmth of shared stories, the blend of voices that could easily become a chorus of support. But that was when life was simple, before the ebb and flow of uncertainty had reshaped her day to day. She needed to orchestrate that nostalgia into a rallying cry for the present. Feeling emboldened, she made her plans with an emerging sense of purpose. Jessica took to the neighborhood with her head held high, the morning air a tantalizing mix of apprehension and excitement. Her resolve hardened with each step, but moments of doubt still slithered in. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a part amidst shadows she barely understood. When she finally reached Marcus's house, her heart pounded like thunder in her ears. The sight of the weathered front porch, littered with the remnants of a long winter, only reminded her of how time could weather down even the mightiest of spirits. She hesitated before knocking, but the resolve she had mustered propelled her hand forward. The sound of her knuckles against the door echoed through her chest like a drum. When Marcus answered, his face broke into a welcoming smile, but she sensed a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. What was this spirited woman doing at his door? She steered the conversation swiftly, revealing her vision for the estate and the potential it bore, not for them, but for the community as a whole. Yet, as she spoke, she caught herself glancing at his expression, searching for signs of enthusiasm or skepticism. Would he be as easy to sway as she hoped? As word of her intentions spilled out, she felt her confidence waver, almost as if the very foundation she was trying to build was fracturing beneath her feet. Despite her courage, Jessica faced a harsh reality. The practicality of her words fought against the weight of her own uncertain beliefs. Just as she began to soothe the rising tide of doubt, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Marcus leaned back, his brow furrowing as he immersed himself in thought. "What you're saying is powerful, Jess. But what do you expect to happen when those who oppose you step in?" The question sent shivers racing down her spine. It pricked the bubble of her burgeoning hope, challenging her to confront not just the external battles, but the internal turmoil that lurked behind her ambitions. How could she lead when her own fears echoed so loudly? As she stumbled through her response, fumbling for clarity amidst the rising tide of her questions, the world outside her window seemed to hold its breath. Would she allow doubt to dictate her steps, or could she rise above and meet the challenges head-on, ready to confront the opposition? The answers felt so close yet miles away, and the path to transformation was still shrouded in uncertainty. Suddenly, in the midst of her uncertainty, a thought emerged. What if Marcus's hesitation became the catalyst for her own fight, the spark to ignite her true potential? With determination, she promised herself that this was only the beginning. The storm was not just coming, it was already here. Would she rise amidst it, or would she cower beneath its fury? As Jessica left Marcus's house, an unsettling mix of trepidation and exhilaration coursed through her. The real test awaited her not only from the outside world but also from the depths of her own spirit. How could she prepare for the confrontation that was bound to come once her plans took flight? Would she find her strength hidden within the turmoil? Jessica walked away from Marcus's house with a tumultuous blend of emotions swirling inside her. Each footstep felt heavier, as if she were carrying the weight of her aspirations alongside the lingering doubt that lurked in her mind. The sun that shone brilliantly overhead gradually faded behind ominous clouds, mirroring her internal struggle. Yet, she knew this moment marked a critical juncture in her journey. Determined to confront her insecurities head-on, she reached for her phone. The conversation with Marcus had been enlightening, but it also illuminated the shadows of her fears. She decided that it would be beneficial to consult Michael. His analytical approach might help her structure her ideas with clarity and precision. The resolve began to build again, compelling her to push past the friction of hesitation. Arriving at Michael's office, she looked at herself in the reflection of the glass doors. The woman standing there was no longer simply the defender of the estate. She was an architect of change, burdened yet insistently brave. As she stepped inside, the hum of machinery and distant chatter filled the space, grounding her in the reality that change often rattled the status quo. Michael greeted her warmly, but as she began to outline her vision, she noticed his brow knit in thought, the gears of his mind visibly turning. "This is ambitious, Jess," he finally replied, his tone cautious. "But have you thought through potential pushback? Last time, Dan nearly walked out over these kinds of discussions." His words reverberated through her, propelling her toward an unexpected confrontation with herself. She was all too familiar with the resistance Dan represented. He embodied her fears manifested in the form of dissent. Tightening her grip on the notepad in front of her, she forced herself to remember why she was here. I know it won't be easy, Jessica responded, her voice steadier than she felt. But that's why I'm here, to make sure we're prepared. I need your expertise, Michael. And I need to push back against that resistance, not just for the estate, but for all of us. The intensity of her words surprised even herself, igniting a flicker of hope. Each pulse of inherent fear transformed into resolve as she spoke. Michael leaned forward, his intrigue piqued, tangible curiosity sparking in his eyes. Let us break this down, then, he continued, and they dove deep into the specifics. Each suggestion was met with strong counterpoints, and Jessica savored the exchange, recognizing how ideas morphed and strengthened through debate. This was collaboration at its finest, and her determination began to solidify into action. After hours of meticulous planning, Jessica emerged from their meeting exhilarated yet exhausted. They had laid the groundwork for her vision, outlined possible obstacles, and crafted a strategic approach to counteract resistance. She felt a shift within herself, a burgeoning confidence beginning to push through her previous uncertainties. Yet, still, the specter of Dan loomed over her, a reminder that challenges were not just theoretical. The tension of confronting him loomed on the horizon, waiting. How she navigated that discussion could define everything she had worked for. As she drove home, a new question emerged, more pressing than ever. Could she confront Dan in a way that would not only advocate for her goals but also persuade him to join her side? The moment of truth was coming. She had taken steps forward, but the real test loomed just ahead. Would she manage to transform opposition into collaboration, or would this become a battle that threatened to unravel all she had built? Jessica paced in her living room, her heart thumping with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The walls around her seemed to close in, amplifying the weight of her decisions. She absorbed the silence, allowing it to cleanse her mind of distractions. Tomorrow would be the day she faced Dan. Tomorrow, she had to challenge her fears and articulate her vision with clarity and conviction. A glance at the clock startled her. Time was fleeting, yet her resolve felt fleeting too. She grabbed a notebook and pen, determined to plan out her thoughts and the points of contention that might arise during her discussion with Dan. What strategies could she employ? How could she frame her arguments to foster understanding rather than pushback? Each line she wrote felt like she was sculpting a piece of art. The words began to flow, the power of collaborative success, the vision for a sustainable future for the estate, the importance of adaptability in their current environment. She paused, biting the cap of her pen. Despite her dedication, a gnawing doubt crept in. What if Dan wouldn't budge? What if her passion fell on deaf ears, dismissed as an overzealous attempt to disrupt their traditional ways? The prospect made her stomach lurch. But then she remembered the spark she felt during her conversation with Marcus, the crack of light that fought against her shadows. She needed to channel that energy. Driven by this realization, she organized her points into a cohesive structure, anticipating Dan's possible responses. By admitting the risks involved, acknowledging his concerns, and presenting solutions, she could create dialogue rather than defense. Each formulated response became a brick in a wall of confidence. That evening she practiced her delivery in front of the mirror, her reflection shifting from hesitation to determination. She adjusted her stance, lifted her chin, and spoke to herself, the words ringing clear and strong in the quiet room. With every repeat, her voice was more robust, affirming her commitment to change. The following morning broke, the sunlight pouring through the window, illuminating the determination etched across her features. She dressed deliberately, selecting a deep blue blouse that grounded her, as if to embody the stability she aimed to represent in the meeting. Upon arriving at the estate, she felt the familiar pulse of anxiety returning, wrapping around her stomach with tight coils. As she approached the conference room, her breaths became shallow. This was the crossroads she'd been anticipating. There could be no backing down now. Jessica entered, greeted by the sight of Dan's nonchalant posture at the end of the table, arms folded as if already skeptical of her intent. Yet, as she sat down, she steadied her pulse with an acute focus. She would not allow him to dictate her emotions. This moment was hers to command. Dan, she began, her voice cutting through the air with an authority she didn't fully feel but insisted upon. "Thank you for meeting with me." As she laid out her vision, tracking Dan's expressions, she anticipated his questions and internalized his skepticism. They were not merely obstacles. They were opportunities to engage, to invite him in, to cultivate shared ownership over the future of the estate. His first retorts came fast and sharp, slicing through her carefully constructed points. Jessica felt her heart race. Yet instead of showing despair, she responded with calculated poise, framing his challenges as valid concerns while delivering counterarguments that showcased not only her passion but her preparedness. The throbbing tension of the discussion was palpable, but as their conversation progressed, she could sense an undercurrent of change. There, just beneath the surface, was the possibility of understanding a structural bridge forming amidst the strain. The exchange deepened, and Jessica saw a flicker of consideration in Dan's eyes, which stirred new energy within her. It was the start of something, perhaps not collaboration yet, but an opening she hadn't dared to envision earlier. And, just like that, in the heart of the resistance, she realized her courage to challenge wasn't just a fight. It was an invitation to grow together. As Dan posed yet another challenging question, her confidence solidified. Could she not only persuade him but also inspire him? The moment of truth was no longer a looming threat. It was an unfolding narrative. Would she drive the message home effectively enough to catalyze this collaboration, or was the storm of skepticism too great for her to overcome? Jessica's heart pounded as she navigated Dan's escalating skepticism. She realized that each question he posed was not just an obstacle, but an invitation to delve deeper into the reasons behind her vision. She took a breath, anchoring herself in the pulsating energy of the discussion. It was now or never. "Dan," she replied, her tone firm. "I understand that change is daunting, especially when it involves traditions that have stood for years. But what if we consider where we want to be in 5 years, or even 10? Stagnation can be as detrimental as sweeping changes." She sensed a slight shift in Dan's posture, a hint that perhaps he was listening. The room crackled with tension as they debated sustainability over profitability, tradition over innovation. With every point she articulated, grounded in statistics and genuine passion, Jessica unearthed strengths she didn't know she possessed. Each rebuttal from Dan became a catalyst for her to articulate broader impacts on their community and the environment. Yet, even as she fought her corner, a persistent whisper in her mind tightened her resolve. Was it truly enough to sway him or the board? Would her words resonate beyond this room? Jessica had never been one to back down, but this felt different. She was not just pushing her agenda. She was stepping into a realm of collective growth and vision. As the conversation progressed, Jessica maintained the narrative of partnership, flipping the dialogue, seeking common ground. "Imagine if we set a precedent for evolving while respecting our heritage. We can protect what's so beautiful about this estate, while adapting to change." Her voice wavered slightly, revealing a crack of vulnerability beneath her professional shield. In that moment, as she expressed her desire to merge progress with preservation, something shifted within her, a deep realization. She wasn't just advocating for her vision. She was presenting Dan with the privilege to be part of something greater. The light in her eyes reflected a newfound clarity. This wasn't a battle. It was a chance to uplift both their ambitions. Dan leaned back, arms now uncrossed. Was he contemplating her words or merely taking a moment to compose his next onslaught? Jessica couldn't tell, but the flicker of curiosity she had seen before was slowly morphing into something more substantial. It was recognition, perhaps a glimmer of acceptance. "You're asking for a lot, Jessica," he stated, his tone cautious yet not entirely dismissive. "We have a legacy here. It's risky." "Absolutely it is," she countered, "but isn't it more risky to ignore the potential for transforming that legacy into a living, breathing embodiment of future possibilities?" Silence enveloped the room, heavy yet hopeful. The weight of uncertainty lingered in the air, but Jessica held her ground. The stakes were palpable. It was not just their estates on the line, but the legacy they would leave behind. But then, Dan's face hardened slightly as he seemed to retreat into his own thoughts, a flicker of resilience fighting against her vision. The walls felt like they were inching back in, but Jessica refused to let them. She mustered all her courage and delivered the point that she believed could bridge the gap. "Let us be a case study, Dan," she suggested with renewed fervor, "for our community. If we lead the way, others may follow. Isn't it worth exploring? What do we have to lose?" As the words hung in the air, a moment of silence enveloped them once more. Could this be the key? Jessica's mind raced as she dissected Dan's facial expressions. Was it working? A small yet clear flicker crossed his eyes, something that felt almost like a reluctant intrigue. Just as she felt that inkling of hope, the meeting abruptly shifted with the sound of the door opening. A new figure appeared, disrupting the flow of their debate. The room's atmosphere shifted. Jessica's resolve toughened. She could not let this moment shatter her momentum. As she prepared to counter the unexpected interruption, she realized she was fully committed to this path of discovery. How could she transform this unwanted interruption into another opportunity? The stakes had been raised, and Jessica was determined to finish the conversation she had started. Could she navigate this new hurdle while maintaining her message, or would it fracture the fragile understanding beginning to form with Dan? The sudden entrance of the newcomer sent a ripple of tension through the room. Jessica's mind snapped into focus, her determination crystallizing. The disruption felt like a challenge, but it also provided her with a chance to reposition herself in this conversation. She glanced at Dan, gauging his reaction to the new arrival, his brows knitted in apparent annoyance. This was her moment to showcase her adaptability, an essential trait she was learning to wield with grace. "Welcome," she said smoothly, redirecting the room's energy. "It seems we've stumbled upon a strategic discussion." She smiled, keen to re-establish control. "I was just outlining an initiative that could revolutionize how we approach our estate's legacy while ensuring sustainability." Dan's expression softened marginally, perhaps impressed by her swift pivot. The interruption could either bolster or break the momentum she had fought hard to build, and she recognized that it was up to her to navigate it wisely. The newcomer, a man in a smart blazer, with a clipboard tucked under his arm, cleared his throat, causing Jessica to wonder about his role in the ensemble. "I'm Greg, here to discuss your proposal," he said, his voice rich with authority. "I heard there might be some radical ideas, and I'd like to learn more about how you envision implementing them." As Greg sat down, Jessica's heart raced. It was an unexpected boon. A new audience was now engaged. "Fantastic," she replied, reveling in her opportunity. "I was just articulating how tradition and innovation don't have to clash. Instead, they can coexist powerfully." She seized the moment, reshaping the conversation as both men listened. Greg's interest granted her confidence, fueling her delivery. Each word became a stone in the foundation she was laying for her argument, framing their future not just as a commercial venture but as a blueprint for inspiring respect and evolution. The back and forth with Dan resumed seamlessly, their momentary triangle now with Greg as an ally. Jessica emphasized collaborative progress, asking, "What if we set out not just to retain our history but to create a legacy of resilience and relevance? Imagine how we could inspire others in our industry to do the same." As she spoke, her conviction deepened. Was she finally breaking through the armor of skepticism surrounding her? She felt like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony that transformed her initial soliloquy into a harmonious collaboration. The tension in the room morphed into a robust dialogue, and Jessica reveled in each exchange, feeling the heartbeat of the discussion synchronize with her aspirations. Yet, beneath the external flow of words, Jessica's internal dialogue wrestled with doubt. Was she simply riding a wave of good fortune, or were her ideas genuinely resonating? These apprehensions threatened to undermine her clarity. As Greg and Dan posed questions, Jessica found her responses weaving personal anecdotes and professional insights together, a potent blend of her journey thus far. This was her chance to reveal her growth not just to them, but to herself. But as the meeting continued, something flickered in Dan's eyes. Was it unease, or a challenge waiting to be articulated? Her stomach tightened instinctively. She sensed that their understanding was still precarious. She would need to navigate this precarious alliance with care. As they delved deeper, the stakes loomed heavier than ever before, demanding both persuasion and strength of character. Jessica knew she was standing on the precipice of transformation, her own, and potentially that of the estate. She needed to fortify her resolve. The road ahead posed possibilities she was eager to explore, yet shadows of doubt lingered, whispering reminders of how easily all this could crumble with a single misstep. Just as clarity began to surface, Dan leaned forward, his expression shifting once more. There's potential here. But his words hung in the air like a suspended threat, the room once again bracing for the impact of his counterpoint. What was coming next would determine not only their fate but Jessica's own growth, a confrontation that promised revelations, challenges, and further clarity on her journey. Dan's words bore the weight of scrutiny, stilling the room with an air of anticipation. Jessica's heart raced, a blend of adrenaline and resolve propelling her forward. She could feel the adrenaline pooling in her veins, sharp and invigorating. This was a pivotal moment, a test of her strategic capabilities and her ability to confront doubt directly. She tightened her grip on the edge of the table, a small gesture intended to anchor her as her mind danced with possibilities. "What may you see as a hurdle?" Jessica asked, her voice curt but laced with genuine curiosity. If she was to grow, she needed to confront obstacles head-on, opening a channel for dialogue instead of retreating into uncertainty. Dan assessed her, his brow furrowing as he contemplated his response. "Your vision is commendable, but it seems overly ambitious. Can tradition realistically adapt to such radical change? Many stakeholders will resist. Have you considered their perspectives?" His tone was authoritative, yet there was an undercurrent of challenge, as if he were daring her to prove him wrong. Jessica inhaled sharply, feeling the subtle shift of power. Here it came, the kind of confrontation that felt like a crucible for her budding leadership. "I expect resistance, Dan," she replied, her tone steady. "Change always encounters scrutiny. But if we can illustrate the concrete benefits through real examples, we can alleviate their fears." With each word, Jessica felt a palpable shift in her confidence. She had spent years carefully analyzing her approach to resistance, learning that presenting fears and insecurities as opportunities rather than barriers would empower her and her team. "Let me share a case study," she proposed, allowing excitement to subtly infuse her voice. "We could examine a business that successfully integrated traditional practices with modern sustainability initiatives. It transformed their community and created a legacy that is both cherished and progressive." Greg, nodding with encouragement, interjected, "I'd like to hear more about how you plan to navigate those challenging relationships. It could very well be the key to this project's success. Ideas alone won't carry this forward." His inquiry, a subtle affirmation, reminded Jessica that new alliances could solidify her position. "I agree," she said, locking eyes with Greg. "Understanding the concerns of stakeholders is critical. Part of my strategy includes actively engaging them in meaningful dialogues, workshops, discussions, even surveys to draw them into the conversation. I want our approach to be inclusive because their voices are essential to the vision's success." As she spoke, Jessica reflected on the growth she had achieved throughout her journey. This wasn't just a chance to alter the estate's future, it was a method to illuminate her own path. Recollections of sleepless nights spent learning about stakeholder engagement and team leadership flickered through her mind. She deconquered barriers that once seemed insurmountable. Perhaps this was her moment to launch into a new stratum of her professional life. Dan's demeanor shifted, revealing a mix of intrigue and skepticism. "But do you really believe they'll be open to that flexibility?" he questioned, probing her faith in the initiative. Doubt bubbled within her, momentarily stalling her resolve. What if he was right? Could she genuinely bridge those gaps? "There's only one way to find out," she asserted, pushing the uncertainty aside. "By approaching them directly and demonstrating our commitment to this legacy. History has shown us that collaboration can yield profound results. I believe that if we entwine our goals with theirs, we'll forge not just an initiative, but a movement." As Jessica concluded, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The tension in the room transformed into fertile ground for dialogue. Yet, amidst the burgeoning possibilities, she couldn't ignore the flicker of doubt flashed through Dan's eyes. There was still an uncharted territory ahead, fraught with the potential for contention. Would they rally behind her vision? Or would she remain at the mercy of their hesitations? With her heart pounding in anticipation, she knew she had to prepare for the next challenge. The stakes were rising, and any miscalculation could provoke fierce resistance. Her mind churned with strategies, each reflecting not only the urgency of the moment, but also the strength of her determination. As the conversation deepened, Jessica's next steps began to crystallize within her a strategy that aligned both with her vision and the impending rebuttals she anticipated. Little did she know that the adversities she faced would not only challenge her ideas but also push her to unravel deeper aspects of her character. Dan kept his expression guarded, a shadow of skepticism still lingering. "I think it's time we truly explored what you mean by a movement. Are you ready to dive into that?" Jessica felt the weight of this inquiry pressing down, an invitation laden with risks as well as opportunities. The depth of her answer could redefine their trajectory altogether. The time had come to face a defining test of her vision and resolve. What lay on the other side remained unknown, and she was poised at the edge of that precipice, heart racing at the brink of transformation. Jessica took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling like a tempest. Dan was right, this wasn't merely about an initiative. It was about building a movement that could transcend their current circumstances. With the stakes as high as they were, she felt the heat of scrutiny pressing against her. "Diving into what a movement means to me," she began, choosing her words with care, "is about more than just change. It's about creating a narrative. We need to inspire those who are skeptical and bring them along for the journey. We have to make them envision not just success for us, but success for them too." The sincerity in her voice was fleetingly persuasive, but she felt a twinge of doubt creeping in. Was it enough? The walls of the conference room felt unforgiving, the cold air stifling her flow of ideas. She tightened her fists, a physical reminder that she needed to harness the energy swirling within. Dan leaned back, fingers steepled, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "A narrative is essential," he agreed, nodding slightly. "But how do you propose we ignite that passion among stakeholders resistant to new ideas? They are rooted in tradition for a reason." His question struck her like a lightning bolt, exposing a gap in her meticulous planning. Connecting the dots between stakeholders' traditions and her vision required a deeper understanding of their values. She racked her brain for a moment, the faces of potential allies flashing before her. Would they be willing to embrace a new narrative, or would they cling to their beliefs stubbornly? By actively listening, she answered, the resolve in her voice solidifying. "What has defined their successes in the past? We need to acknowledge their achievements as we integrate new methods. They should see this not as a rejection of what has been, but as an evolution, a progression built on the solid foundation they've already established." Greg's eyes sparkled with understanding, and she could see he was starting to envision the possibilities. Creating workshops focused on both recognition and integration sounds pivotal. It's not just about presenting ideas, it's about cultivating partnerships. Jessica smiled, buoyed by his support. "Exactly. Workshops can be platforms for shared experiences. We can form work groups that include tradition bearers and innovators alike, where constructive dialogue can thrive." The knot in her stomach loosened slightly, her mind racing with the logistics. However, as ideas spilled forth, a new thought gripped her. What if her notion of partnership came off as condescending? The last thing she wanted was to alienate those she sought to engage. The internal struggle morphed into a silent question: was she really prepared to understand their histories deeply enough to bridge the gap? Dan interrupted her thoughts, voice sharp. "Laying bare the complexities of stakeholder engagement will not be easy. Many may view this as a threat to their way of life, rather than an invitation to participate in progress." Jessica found herself at a crossroads. The challenge before her required not just resilience, but a commitment to authenticity. How could she align their fears with her ambition without falling into the trap of overpromising? "I can't control how they perceive this change, but I can control how I approach it," she said firmly. "In my workshops, I want to incorporate elements that celebrate their heritage while presenting tangible benefits they can gain. The focus will be their stories, not mine. Dan nodded thoughtfully, but the flicker of skepticism remained. It's ambitious, Jessica, a gamble. Are you prepared to adapt if it backfires? What's your plan B? Her pulse quickened again, the weight of his question impacting her like a punch to the gut. A plan B? She had to be ready for anything. There was no point in being defensive. This was the moment to sharpen her adaptability, to rise to unforeseen challenges. I need to gather more insights, broaden my feedback channels. I'll seek out informal gatherings, small discussions outside the traditional structures. Before we launch into workshops, I want to know what drives their loyalty to tradition. And if I discover that certain approaches will be contentious, those conversations will guide my adjustments and subsequent actions. As she spoke, the pieces began to assemble in her mind. She had thought ahead, but now it felt like she was weaving a more intricate tapestry, one that intertwined their past with her future. Yet doubt continued to gnaw at her gut. Would the willingness to adapt be enough to carry her vision over the line? The tension in the room was palpable, a lingering question that hung unspoken. Could she truly navigate the delicate balance of honoring the old while forging ahead with the new? Let us reconvene after you've held some of those initial discussions, Dan finally said, his expression morphing from skepticism to guarded hope. Your commitment to understanding those perspectives could either shore your foundation or reveal cracks you didn't anticipate. Jessica met his gaze, heart thumping with mingled excitement and fear. This was her moment of truth, where her personal growth would be tested against the weight of tradition and the necessity for change. She stood poised to step into the unknown. The tension in her chest simmered at the prospect of both possibilities and pitfalls. With determination blooming in her heart, one thought resonated crystal clear: there was much to unearth, and she had to begin forging her path. As she left the room, the ripple effects of her choices already looming large, she braced herself, willing to confront whatever storms awaited. How deeply would her investigation into their histories reshape her approach, and could it reinvent her leadership altogether? Jessica woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her veins. Here she stood, on the brink of a monumental shift, not just for the estate but for herself. Her mind swirled with the possibilities of what lay ahead. She felt like a coiled spring, ready to burst forth with energy and determination. After dropping Emily and Ryan off at school, she drove to the estate, mentally preparing for the informal discussions that would be critical in shaping the future. The grand structure loomed before her, and she cocooned herself in its history, feeling a connection she had long sought to embrace. Today, she was not just reclaiming a place of refuge. She was advocating for a legacy. As she initiated conversations with locals, the retired school teacher who had once organized community activities, the market owner who thrived on connections, and the elderly librarian whose shelves overflowed with stories, she recognized that history was not just about preserving buildings, but embodying the spirit of the people. Their eyes lit up as they recounted the estate's past, filled with laughter, events, and a community spirit that echoed deeply. What Jessica discovered was more profound than mere nostalgia. She unearthed a collective yearning for reconnection. As they shared their thoughts and emotions, she saw the pieces of her vision weaving seamlessly into the fabric of their histories. Through multiple discussions, Jessica solidified a vision that resonated, transforming the estate into a community hub that married the old with the new. They talked about creating art shows, historical exhibits, and green spaces, breathing life back into the estate while honoring their collective past. One afternoon at the local coffee shop, she shared her thoughts with Marcus and Michael, who had eagerly joined her plan. It's simple, she explained passionately. By engaging our community in every step of the process, we'll not just respect their traditions, we'll give them ownership of the future. Their eyes gleamed with understanding and excitement. This was not just a plan, it was a movement, a chance for everyone to uplift the entire community while preserving its roots. When Jessica announced the first community meeting at the estate, a wave of apprehension washed over her. Doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps this would all unravel. What if the initial voices of skepticism drowned out the hopeful harmonies she had cultivated? The day arrived, and the hall filled with familiar faces, some excited, others skeptical. But in that moment she remembered her purpose and the people who had believed in her vision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began with clarity, her voice steady. "Welcome to the future of our community and the estate. Let us remember where we've come from as we boldly step forward." As she spoke, she noticed how her words transformed the air around them. They were no longer just community members. They were allies in crafting a new narrative that blended the elegance of tradition with the vigor of innovation. Conversations flowed, ideas sparked, and concerns were addressed collaboratively. In that gathering, Jessica observed a gradual transformation. Dan's eyes were no longer mere flickers of skepticism but glimmers of intrigue. As she wrapped up, he stood offering a proposal to create a committee for overseeing the estate's renovation. Recognition and relief flooded Jessica. She felt it deep within her bones that this was the moment she had long awaited. A transformation was unraveling not just in her community but within herself. Over the following months, they overcame challenges together, forging new alliances through open dialogues. Jessica's confidence solidified alongside Dan's growing support. The whispers of doubt that had clung to her slowly faded into the background. She was not just leading a project, she was embodying a movement. Finally, at the unveiling of the estate's new exhibition, Jessica stood before a crowd that spanned generations. The walls that had once echoed only with memories now resonated with laughter and life. She spoke with a solid confidence, honoring her journey and celebrating the collective achievements. And in that moment, Jessica looked around, heart swelling with pride. She had achieved what had once felt impossible, a transformation ignited not only her community, but also her spirit. She stared into the faces of those she had rallied and found inspiration reflected back. The shadows of doubt had evaporated, replaced by a solid foundation of trust and collaboration. Her journey had not only reclaimed the estate, it had reclaimed her belief in herself. As applause filled the air, Jessica smiled, achieving fulfillment beyond her wildest dreams, a legacy she forged, rooted in authenticity. It was time to share this story with the world. The journey of personal and collective rebirth echoed through her mind, a testament to the truth that individuals could rise together while holding on to the fabric of their histories. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that unveil the beauty of transformation. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for these inspirational narratives. Comment your reactions and theories about Jessica's journey to reclaim the estate and her personal growth. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see the power of determination and community spirit. Don't wait even one more second to spread the message of resilience,